I'm sweating. Sorry. Do you want to start?
It's fine. You're doing well. We can't see the sweat patches.
Get rid of this thing. Sorry. Keep want to call it Japanese knotweed.
Right, let's start. Welcome to what we're calling Welsh Wednesdays. Hello, I'm a stand-up comedian and writer. I'll throw that one in. I like the work. Kiri Pritchard Mclean. I am also a Welsh learner, and this is my pal, Katie.
Yeah, I'm Katie Gill Williams. I'm not a writer, but I am a Welsh learner.
What we decided to do is we're going to chat about different subjects in English to do with Wales or just whatever's going on with us at the moment, and then we're going to try and have a little conversation at the end purely in Welsh for about a minute, a sort of summary of what we've been talking about, a sort of like a show and tell but in Welsh, so it'll be less show and tell for me and more sort of slow and yell because that's my two mediums of speaking Welsh, is incredibly slowly and shouting the words that I'm confident with. This subject this week, I wanted to talk about the Welsh knot, and I wanted to talk about it because it was a part of history that I was taught in school about it briefly, and then I've learned more about it since, and I think it's fascinating because in some ways it's so important and will give you a greater understanding of Welsh people's attitude towards the language on every side.
Henry VIII, we talked about him a little bit last week. He's such a knob, like just crops up everywhere. So he actually passed a legislation. I can't even remember when he was around, when he was knocking around.
I think it's about 1534, I think.
And it made it illegal for anyone in public life to speak Welsh.
You're right, it was like not to be used in courts or anything official, basically.
So he kind of planted that seed, and all his little descendants just kind of perpetuated that. And I think that was slowly the biggest undoing of Wales and its culture, really.
The Welsh language went from being a language that most people spoke in Wales, was their first language, to Welsh became the language of the working class and the commoners, because they weren't in that those are upper echelons of public life with power. So English became the language of the landed gentry, and the working class people spoke Welsh. So then in, I think, what was it, 1854, I think, 3 barristers, English-speaking barristers, were commissioned by the government to do an investigation into the Welsh. They basically said, these people are feral, they're savage, they're immoral, which is a really important part of it. They're stupid, they're feckless, and they can't ever succeed as a country. And a huge part of that is because of the language, which was referred to as evil. A lot of the times they were conducting these interviews with first language Welsh people in English and going, this person's an idiot, and you're like, no, you're just speaking to them in a language that they don't use or haven't used in months or years or don't understand. So these people will never become moral and civilized as long as they're speaking this language. And it was in a blue pamphlet, and this sort of case, I guess, became known as the treachery of the Blue Books. They were advised basically to get rid of the Welsh language and to start in schools. So the Welsh knot is really symbolic in Welsh history and in the country, but weirdly not everyone knows about it, and every English person I speak to is incredibly shocked by it. It would be basically a bit of string with a bit of wood, sometimes lead, on it, and it would have WN for Welsh knot, or it'd have the whole thing written. And if you were caught speaking Welsh in school, if you were overheard speaking it, you would have to wear it. If another child spoke it, you could basically snitch on them and go and be a grass and go, that he just spoke Welsh, so then it would be taken off you. And why you wanted to do that is whoever was wearing it at the end of the day, sometimes the end of the lesson, would be beaten. So it was a way of teaching children, conditioning children not to sort of speak the language. The parents would have had to approve that going in the school. But I think it's because they made the case that to be, a dynamic, successful nation, you need to get rid of this language. That's what's holding you back.
The rankest bit of all that is they've kind of framed it. So when this policy or whatever it was came in, they framed it as a vehicle to aid education, is my understanding. And I think the manipulation involving really young people is so disgusting. I read somewhere that, you know, they resented their parents then for speaking it at home. It's just such like, what does that do mentally to a child? It's, I think that's the cruelest part of it, because basically they've snuck their own bias and prejudice in, you know, through this vehicle of like, oh, we're doing the right thing by their education. It's all about just power. It's nothing to do with progressing kids' education.
One of the reasons they were so pro and made it about education, pro getting rid of it, is because they were like, they basically said all Welsh literature was dog shit. And in fact, the phrase is something like, Welsh literature, if it can even be afforded that phrase, as in it's not even worthy of being called literature. And it's like, how do you know if you can't read it?
It is awful. And I think the cruelest part of it is just how kids really want to express themselves. And like when you watch, like, my little boy's only 2, and it just him forming these words, and it's so organic and lovely and natural, and just to completely piss all over that and like really oppress it, it's just absolutely savage. And it is embarrassing because, you know, I'm not taking like responsibility for it, but you do think like some of the shit that like English have done throughout the years. I read, it was Wikipedia, so maybe it probably needs a bit of questioning, but it said even as late as the year 2000, a lot of therapists said if like for disabled children, not to expose them to Welsh language.
Yeah.
Like, that's just, where did that come from? What's that founded in?
Yeah.
It's just all misconceptions and misunderstanding.
It wasn't as widespread as we thought it was. So I thought it was across Wales.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, but it's really, they sort of concentrated on basically sort of like the west coast and like Ceredigion and, you know, like Carmarthen, places like that got hammered especially hard.
One kid being beaten up for speaking their native language is one too many. It's absolutely disgusting. Welsh language got so pushed to the margins that actually it was the north and probably the west of Wales where it kind of had a stronghold.
It's more dense, the Welsh speaking population in North Wales, definitely.
But it's mad, like with Bangor as well, just this city that's in the middle of all of this Welsh culture. It's not very well spoken in Bangor, but I think it's because there's so much outside influence that comes in. And then, but yet you've got Ynys Môn all around it, you know, you've got real Welsh speaking, strong Welsh speaking communities. But it's the legacy that all of this, like hundreds of years ago, this is what it's left behind. I really love living in North Wales because it holds on to it and it fights for it, and there's so much heart behind it. And I think the Knot kind of puts it into perspective. Like, people were beaten up for this. Like, it's just it does put into perspective, and it does kind of spur on and drive you to learn the language. I do believe that these things become ingrained in you and they're part of your mentality and your psyche, but sometimes I think that about the North, you know, it's its own kind of culture and its own world. And
I think there's a lot more kinship between Wales and the North, because it's like those arseholes down there who vote this lot in every time, who don't give a shit about us, who don't send any money here, who think we're all stupid, who think that culture only happens down there, who don't care about us and care about our people, who decimated our manufacturing. Those statements could be about the North or they could be about Wales.
Yeah, but then I think you can even boil it down again. There'll be communities in, you know, even on the outer skirts of London and stuff, that'll be like, Westminster, don't speak to me, they don't mean anything to me.
I'm aware of appropriating the language that I've seen in a discussion that mainly about race, but I do think there's an element of trauma of having this language like physically taken from you or beaten from you. I think there's an element of trauma that exists there relating to their language. My dad was like, oh, there's no point in speaking Welsh. He's like, he saw it as an old-fashioned language that wasn't, he was like, it won't help you get jobs. It's the exact opposite. I would have been able to work far more if I was fluent in Welsh, but he just saw it as like, he's got quite a complicated relationship with the language for various reasons, but one of the tenets was like, you don't need it, and like it's a language you don't need to invest in for like work reasons, which is so ridiculous. I spoke about this on Absolute Clang here, guys, on one of the Frankie Boyle shows, and there's an Irish guy on it who's so smart and was talking about history, and I started talking about the Welsh Knot and how loads of people didn't know about it, and he was like, I've never heard of that. And then so I was explaining the situation about how it was, intended to eradicate the language and bring this sort of bring the industry and morality of England. And he said, so you were colonized? And I was like, I get so, and it's always very dangerous to use the language of colonization in Wales, because that I feel like it can sometimes be a way of negating our involvement in colonization as part of the empire, which we benefited from. And it's really important to acknowledge that the Welsh benefited from the British Empire. We weren't like, we're just passive to this, like we did all right out of it. But in terms of like the idea of getting rid of a language and basically the dominating force being seen to be aspirational and moral and civil is a colonial act. And this is what my Welsh teacher was saying. He said that there's a lot of academics from the continent of Africa who've read about Welsh history and be like, there's lots of parallels here with the colonization and sort of like, we're imposing civility that they did in parts of Africa as well.
You do feel the shame as well, and as someone who's moved to Wales, I just think, just friggin', just open a book and try and learn their language. Like, just have some respect, really.
The demise of the Welsh language is important in health terms as well. Like I remember when I was in school, they were really pushing for radiographers who were Welsh speakers, because what you have is basically, especially in North Wales, you have some like hill farmer come down who can't speak English at all, and you have to communicate something very important about his health to him. Like, you're gonna have to come here at this time, this is what it'll do, you need to take this. And like, what happens if you can't speak the language to someone? Like, you can't care for people properly. It's mad to me that you would have something as important as cancer or fucking being in court for falsely accused or correctly accused and not be able to communicate in the language.
When I moved here, I was telling you I used to teach, and I kind of was like, well, I should have a teaching job. Outstanding Ofsted recommendation. Thank you very much. But then they were just like, yeah, but you can't speak the language. I was like, yeah, but I'll learn it. But actually, they have to be quite militant in it, because I could really screw up a kid's education in Welsh, because I think I'm entitled as a teacher who's come from England. I've got all these skills. And I had a big, massive chip on my shoulder for some time where I was just like, excuse me, look at my CV, but you don't speak Welsh. And I think, well, I have to put the legwork in for that. And I think that's sometimes when it's just a bit that Brits abroad mentality, isn't it? Like, come on then, everyone speaks English. So,
yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is just, an ignorance that and a privilege we've kind of grown up with, is like, we can travel to so many places and communicate. And that just feels a bit icky to me as well. So I'd much rather sound like an idiot in another language, but I'm trying.
If I was English and there was this country next to me that had this amazing culture, I'd be like, how cool's that? We can go on holiday somewhere where they're going to speak a different language, which is how my partner is about it. He's English and he's like, it is so cool. He's like, I love the language, and he's like learning the language, and he's like, I love it, we can hear people speaking around me. And like the joy that people take when he in his very like English accent is like, diolch yn fawr, like that people really love it that he's trying. Partially, like North Wales has a reputation for not being particularly welcoming in terms of, Wales, like, oh, there's a welcome in the valleys, but like, not like, the thing about Bethesda is people will welcome you with open arms. Like, we don't have that. Oh, Carnarvon is the most welcoming place in the world. We don't have that reputation, and he's had nothing but like love and acceptance from people around here, which is so lovely. I don't think you have to speak Welsh to be Welsh. I want to say that, like, straight up. but I feel more myself when I am able to speak Welsh. Not when I'm speaking it. I feel much more comfortable in English, but I feel more like the Welsh person I want to be, and more in touch with my ancestors, and my nine who's no longer with us, and like her life and the language that she used, I think is really important.
I want to see it thrive, mostly just because there's some batshit stuff that goes on in Welsh culture that just shouldn't be, it just shouldn't be gone. Even if it's just for the linen outfits of the Eisteddfod,
Yeah.
I do feel like sometimes like a little frigging cling on somewhere, because sometimes maybe it's just the identity that I'm quite envious of. And I remember someone was like really taking the piss out of me the other week because I moved so much. Like, I moved from Newcastle when I was 4, which, I had a little Geordie accent and all that. Grew up in Widnes and then went to Cornwall, Liverpool, and then someone kind of mentioned to me, again, don't want to sound derogatory, but like, you sound like you could be from like Connors Quay or somewhere. And I was like, just feel really fucking vanilla and nondescript. And I don't mean that, but like sometimes Widnes feels a bit like, I love Widnes. It's an amazing town, great for commuting, like Manchester and Liverpool are on your doorstep. But it's like, we've got Melcy. And so I really kind of clung on to like the Beatles or like the Manchester music scene. And like, sometimes you feel a bit of a fraud because you're like, I am just on the outside, like a woolly back, really. Loads of people I knew would be like proper like that. You know what I mean? I'm not being funny or not. And you'd be like, you're from freaking Widnes, but they just wanted to feel something. I guess I do when I've had to drink or whatever, because don't want to be accused of being from Connors Quay. I'm only joking, Connors. I've never been to Connors Quay. I bet you it's a cultural hub.
Identity is really complicated because I'm only confident enough since probably my 30s, or maybe 20s, to say I'm Welsh. I'm Welsh. I'm Welsh. I'm Welsh. Because when I was growing up here, when I lived in Wales and was having speaking Welsh at least once a week in school, I would be like, oh no, I'm English. And people, even today, someone on the phone was like, were you born here? And I was like, what a fucking weird question. Like, because and I was like, no, I wasn't. I was born in England and I moved here when I was 8 months old. It's like negligible, but like I always had this thing about, well, I was born in England, and people would often be like, were you born in England? And it's like, I've never. I think I've been to Gloucester where I was born once. Like, I've nothing. I know more about Fred West from there than I do about the actual place. It's very unhelpful, and it creates such identity crisis. And I think every Welsh person, well, lots of Welsh people have identity crisis over it. So it creates that thing of like, what, like, oh, we're Welsh, but you're not, and like in group, out group stuff that's so unhelpful, when actually it's like broad church. I think if you come here and you love the country, and especially if you want to learn the language, like like, you don't ever have to be like, it's not even like you have to be fluent, otherwise you're not Welsh. If you're not Welsh speaking, you're not Welsh. No, like, I think just a desire to respect the culture in whatever way you see that fit, you're Welsh. Like, if you feel it. And it was a Welsh teacher who taught me that, and when she said it, she burst into tears. Because she was, okay, this is the Welshest thing ever. My Welsh lesson at Nantcorthain, she played a bit of Only Boys Allowed, singing, I think, Calon Lan, and she was like, it was incredibly moving, and she said after it, she was like, what's amazing about that, and she was like, most of those boys they don't speak Welsh, and she was like, you can't tell me they're not Welsh. And she's like, Welsh is something you feel, it's inside. I'm literally welling up now. And she's like, it's something you feel. And she was like, if you feel Welsh, you are.
Yeah, well, I definitely, I've kind of rubber stamped now, but also like through your lovely story then, I was like, this is how immature I am. I was like, well, I feel a Welshman.
Should we chat in Welsh?
Oh yeah, shit, yeah. So, dwi'n meddwl dros y flynyddoedd, roedd Lloegr yn wneud llawer o pethau ofnadwy. So, dwi'n teimlo eog, dipyn bach o eog, achos dŵad o tu allan Lerpwl, wel, Lloegr yn reiddiol. Ond dwi'n meddwl dyma pam mae'n pwysig, os ti'n symud rhywle gwahanol, ti'n angen dysgu iaith. Mae Welsh Not yn... ddim yn cofio. Be dwi isio deud ydy Welsh not is a cruel, oppressive tool. Felly mae'n pwysig I ffrio. Ffai? I don't know, I think that's fry. Anyway, dwi'n meddwl wedi gorffen. Dwi ddim yn siŵr.
Dwi'n meddwl Welsh not yn bwysig iawn I hanes o Gymru. Ond dwi'n meddwl pobl pwy sy'n byw yn Lloegr a Alban a Iwerddon angen I dysgu am yr hanes achos dwi'n meddwl mae llawer o trauma efo y iaith a'r y iaith yn ysgol eto. Dim eto. Na. Doesn't matter. Dwi'n meddwl pobl yn Cymru angen I cofio yr Welsh not a Tryweryn a'r ond edrych sbio I dyfodol future.
Dwi ddim yn siŵr. Ella.
Yeah. I'm finding this hard to talk about.
Yeah. Because
okay.
you don't want to be derogatory and say but like I was just going, it's something bad. Like that's really basic. It was freaking brutal.
What would you want to say? What you think I maybe said?
Yes. So it's important to learn about the Welsh not because people in Scotland and Ireland to put it in context, to know about the history and the trauma of the language. So whilst it's important to do that, it's also important to look forward to the future.
What I was trying to say is I think it's important to know about it, and also I think it's important that English people know about it and Scottish people and Irish people know about it, so they can try and dash the trauma, understand the trauma linked to the language and schools and the language. But I think as Welsh people we need to remember it and things like Tryweryn, but we need to look forward. It's about looking forward.
It's about acknowledging that piece of history, even though it's hard, learning from it and using it to make things better. There are people in England who don't know about it, definitely. And there's people who probably play it down or even doesn't sound that bad. But when you actually really think about what it was.
Just say now that the Welsh government got, it couldn't happen, but was elected and was in charge of, learnt this one the other day, San Steffan, Westminster, and so was it suddenly in charge, and they said, right, Welsh is the language, that's the only way to be civilized and modern and global, and we think your children will benefit and be happy and have a better education if they speak Welsh. And then the parents of that school vote to beat your child every time they speak English. And bearing in mind you speak English at home, they have been educated up until then in English. It would feel horrible, but you would also be thinking you're doing the right thing by your kid. So it's no wonder it's such a emotive subject. And you're right, it shouldn't be diminished, because if you put it in terms of that, you're like, what the fuck? That would never happen. Welsh teacher says it's a heroic act. Anyone who engages in the learning of Welsh is a heroic act, because you're saving the language and meaning that future generations get to be involved in this beautiful culture. So yeah, I think now we see Welsh as being not a it's this gwenny thing that we've got to learn in school and it's boring. It's this thing of oh no, it's an amazing, special, wonderful thing that we get to have that. We hope that you have enjoyed watching two women learning Welsh and speaking it badly.
Yes, I hope so too.
walk away.